Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christie, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. Oh, we are in for a treat today. I have a new friend. Her name is Dr. Thymai Dong-Sheehan, and she is so many fabulous things. Okay, she is a Zumba lover. She is an educator and an author, and she has a stepdaughter who is in her 20s, but she's already been to 22 countries. And that is because Thymai also loves to travel. And she has been, she started with a summer abroad in France, which is pretty great. But she's been to 15 or 16 countries and 37 of the 50 states. She is all things vulnerability, spirituality, and equity. And as an educator, she does believe in helping all humans. And today, she's our guest on Productive Joy. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, we are about to have a lot of fun. And we discovered that we're both kind of experts in the adult learning space, which is a space that kind of everybody needs because we are all teaching people something all day long. So what would you say in like 30 seconds or so that would get people super excited about listening to this episode?
Well, I think that my family history is pretty exciting, which is the catalyst for why I wrote this book, this memoir, that I love to be able to talk about the beauties of my so-called Asian life. But not a lot of people know this. Sometimes I share, it just really kind of depends. But I actually am both an immigrant and a refugee. That's an identity that is very salient to me. And it sounds kind of interesting because usually when you consider immigrant, they choose to go to a different country. And then if you're a refugee, it's by force. For us, it was both. We actually are the part of the group of Vietnamese refugees that escaped to Saigon on April 30th, 1975. And so this year, 2025, is just so significant for my family in so many ways because that morning the alarms went off and my dad had a choice. Did he want to stay or did he want to take me, my older sister, and my mom, who was pregnant, by the way, with my younger sister, and really just try to beat all odds and escape and find, a better life here in the United States. And so I shared that story, even though it goes way, way back, because it really is the reason why I am who I am today, why I wrote the book, why I have the hopes and dreams that I have in terms of, what I do personally and professionally. But it all boils down to my dad too. There's some stories embedded within that escape and what happened after that I think are pretty interesting and fascinating. But really it boils down to, if any listeners out there are just thinking about identity and who they are, who they've been, who they want to be. I mean, for me, it boils down to those three things that you shared, those beauties: vulnerability, equity, spirituality. My dad modeled those for me, really taught me about those things, and I use those to shape who I am and who I want to continue to be going forward.
Okay, so this is going to be a fabulous episode, as previously mentioned. And I am so impressed that you took those, what people would consider hardships or difficult circumstances, and you turned them into something magical and special and important. And I think the most valuable part of that is that you are now helping others do the same with their lives by telling your story. So thank you for being willing to tell your story. So you came here as a young child. You had to have been young. You look way too young to have not been young in 1975.
Oh, you're so kind. I was 2.5.
Okay, yes, that tracks. I was born in 1976, so that makes good sense. But you came here as a little one, and your family had to do a full start over. What did your parents instill in you that got you to the point where you chose to get your doctorate, where you're helping other people, where you're making magical things happen?
Thank you for asking that question and allowing me to talk about my mom and dad a little bit more. So one of the things I had alluded to before was that story about my father. And so thanks to the U.S. military, I will always be grateful for them. But back then it was easy for us to actually immigrate to the United States. There were resettlement camps that were, I want to say four that were located throughout the United States. And we ended up at Camp Pendleton. And when my dad recounts this story, it just stuck with me. But he shares a story about how, okay, so we're in this camp. It's my dad, my mom is pregnant with my younger sister. I'm 2.5. My oldest sister is 5 years old. And we go, what now? We don't know the language. We definitely don't know where we're at, the country. So all of it seems very foreign to us. My dad shared that there was an officer that approached him and said, well, we might have found some volunteers to the church who would be willing to sponsor you and let you come live with them until you get on feet. And my dad felt, wow, this is amazing, because who's going to 4, soon to be 5, go live with them. Well, the officer said he would connect with my dad later on, and that news never came. So my dad, and this is an advantage that we had too, my dad actually could speak English. And to answer your question, my dad taught English in Vietnam. And so that might have been the inspiration for me to start out as a classroom teacher in my career. But he sought out this officer, and the officer said, "You're not going to believe this, or maybe you will," but he said, "Oh, well, the couple we found is Black, so you don't want to go live with them." And my dad's response to them was, "But they're human, aren't they?"
Yeah.
And so not long after, we got on a plane, we met Pinky and his wife in San Antonio. They weren't affluent. They owned a motel room, and they let us live in their motel room until we figure things out. But I share that because just think of that response that my dad said, they're all human. And so that has just been engraved in my head, in my heart, and my soul. And I think that's really what has motivated me to do the work that I do as an educator, as someone who is just trying to make a difference in the world and, where everybody does matter.
Well, we are all human, and I work hard to remember that fact every single day. And I think that those of us that are doing that are really at more peace than those of us that are looking at people and trying to put them into categories or saying this one, these people, those people. We are people. And I love that you were accepted by humans and that you had a safe place to live and a safe place to grow up. What was school like for you? Did you love it, hate it? I mean, you obviously kept going, so you must have liked something.
Yes. And there's all sorts of stories there in that memoir about what that school experience was like. But it was challenging at first, being a student that didn't look like other students. And there definitely was some, incidents where I felt I did not belong. I remember being told in the elementary recess, playground to go back to China. I mean, just things like that, kids say because they don't know any better. And growing up, middle school, high school, it was challenging too. But, some of that is also just immaturity, right? Mm-hmm. But I think those experiences, instead of making me sort of hide within myself, it made me even want to more connect with people to really counter that, to fight that, to say, what, it doesn't matter what we look like. We all have a place. We all belong. Mm-hmm. And so it did the opposite. I think, in some ways it might have made me scared to want to connect to people. But for me, it made me really try even harder to reach people that didn't look like me and really try to cement those connections that are so important.
What a beautiful way to approach things. And it makes me sad that the word equity has taken on somehow a negative connotation because it goes back to us all being humans. And so you are helping people understand that equity is a good thing and that it's really about humanity. Tell me how vulnerability comes into play.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I talk a lot, when I was actually doing my doctoral research, I remember going, I'm going to do vulnerability. And then I researched and said, Brené Brown's already doing vulnerability.
And she did it real well.
She's doing it really well. She made social science popular. But, I said, well, I would like to do vulnerability across racial lines. Because again, based on my own experiences, that was something very, very important to me. And so I took it and just went a step further. But, there's a vulnerability that we either choose to be vulnerable, like she says, because she thinks vulnerability is the birthplace of joy and, all this
and courage and all the things.
And so, but, some of us don't have that choice. It's imposed upon us, right? So, refugees, immigrants, right? So we have that vulnerability. But again, instead of seeing it as a weakness, I wanted to leverage that vulnerability on my terms. So it was more about learning from previous experiences where I felt very vulnerable and very exposed. How can I flip that? How can I flip the script? How can I flip the narrative so that I'm making it something that's going to help me grow and help me be more connected to other people? Because really, it's about leveraging in a way that will allow me to be a better version of myself and not live in fear, right?
Which is beautiful. And for those of you that have never written a book, writing a dissertation is one way that you write a book. Then writing a book because you want to write a book is a fully and completely different experience. Tell us about those two experiences, because you've done both. And I don't know about you, but I found them to be two very different things altogether.
I love that you bring that up. I love that you bring that up. It's so true. In fact, I think I probably drove my dissertation chair crazy because I kept trying to write these long, illustrative, poetic sentences.
Me too.
Comment in the margin. This has to be technical. Get to the point.
So you will appreciate this because I had a sentence once that one of my chairs turned into 6 separate sentences. That's how flowery and comma-y and and it was like, ma'am, no.
Yeah. So that was challenging. And actually, I want to pay tribute to one of my mentors. I think it's important to have mentors in life. But one of my mentors, he was my very first principal. 25 years later, we still text, and we even had lunch not too long ago. But I remember I made sure he was on my dissertation committee. And, at the end, after you defend and the committee gets together and they decide whether they want to pronounce you doctor or not, he even said, you should totally turn this dissertation into a book. And I remember thinking, ooh.
Oh, that sounds awful. I don't ever want to write again, ever.
Well, how can I turn it into something less dissertation and more? And so in my head, I was already thinking, I want to write this memoir. And so if you were to read the memoir, it actually is part memoir, part culturally instructive research.
Yeah.
Because my husband is reading it and he reads it next to me and he's like, okay, I've got to look at some of these words.
Yeah.
When he's in that equity section, because that does have some research in there, but it does tie into, humanity in the real life and things that we all can relate to, whether
which is beautiful and what we all need. And I think that everybody who writes a dissertation should have to turn it into something that people can hold on to because it can't be so technical. As a matter of fact, so I'm a dissertation chair now, and I work with the doctoral students, and I tell them, your 8th grader should be able to read this and understand it. Like, you've got to turn it into something people can and will read. And that's what the beauty of a good book is something that people pick up and say, I want this to impact my life. So tell us again the name of your book, because you breezed right past it, and where people might find it, and then who needs to pick it up.
Yes, thank you for that. And I was going to say too, just to add to your question, writing a memoir is such a revelatory experience.
Oh, I bet.
That is the best way to get to know yourself and to improve on yourself as well, because you're sitting down choosing which stories to write, how to write it, and then how you're going to reflect on it and move forward from there. But to answer your most recent question, so the book is titled, it's a mouthful, it's called The Beauties of My So-Called Asian Life, Vulnerability, Equity, and Spirituality. And those 3 beauties really have just kept surfacing up in my life. And so I just love being able to sit down and collect the stories and present them in that way. The book is available on Amazon. You can go to Amazon and purchase it there. It's also available on on Goodreads, anything online. So it's available wide as a hardback, as a hardbook, as a paperback, also as available as ebook as well.
Nice. Okay. And so if I were to pick this up, who's your target audience? Who did you write this book for?
I'm going to say anyone that's human,
Yeah.
anyone that really has questioned their identity or is trying to discover who they are. I don't really want to just say, it's a certain type of readers. I really think I try to write from a viewpoint that is humanistic.
Yeah.
And so if you're someone that's just interested in learning what it's like to, have made mistakes when you were younger, how to learn from those mistakes and move forward. If you're someone who is grappling with what it is to be vulnerable and how to turn that around as a strength. If you're someone who has ever been discriminated against, if you're an educator working in that space and really wanting to combat any type of discrimination within schools, if you're someone who is Christian or of other faiths, I talk about that spirituality in the Christian sense, but also just in the sense that we're inherently all connected as humans. And so I know I might be cheating answering your question, saying that it's for everyone, but I really do feel like if you're someone who is just believes in humanity and has hope for the future of humanity, I think it might be a good read for you.
Well, and it sounds like it's exactly that, a good read for all humans. We need more of that. We need more of the understanding and reality of how someone else lived life. The only perspective I have is my own, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn other people's perspectives and gain value and knowledge and wisdom from all of that. So clearly, as an educator by trade, you can't help yourself, right? Like, you want to teach people things. And as you're teaching people things, where did that start? Like, I know your dad was an educator, and then did you teach middle school, high school, elementary? Like, what did you teach? And then how did that end up becoming an adult learner space?
Thank you. I love that question. That's helping me reflect too. I started out teaching middle school. I taught 4 years and in middle school, I taught French in a class they called exploratory languages. And then after 4 years in that, I moved to a suburb northwest of Austin. And there I taught at a high school for 7 years. I taught French, all levels, all the way up to advanced placement. And then I also taught a couple of levels, Spanish 1 and 2. So it was a lot of preps, and you know what I mean?
Well, and how many languages do you speak, Thymai?
Okay, so now we're getting into another story here because I'm going to say 3 1/4.
Okay.
I would say English, French, Spanish, and then Vietnamese, shamefully or not, is the fourth language that's not conversational for me. And that is just when we came over, and my mom and dad really wanted my sisters and I to fit in, to not sound differently. So they insisted on us watching American TV, speaking to each other in English. They would speak to us in Vietnamese. We would respond in English.
Interesting.
And understand it, I just can't produce it.
I feel like there are an awful lot of families that do that. And, I would give anything to be bilingual. And maybe one day I will take the energy it would take to learn it. But as a 2.5-year-old, to have learned both languages would have been really easy. And yet you clearly have a propensity towards language anyway. You heard a different language in your home and now you speak several others. That's just impressive. So I am always in awe of those who can think in more than one way. What language do you think in?
English. English. It really depends on what I'm immersed in. When I was getting my master's in French and it was at a university where it was an immersive program, I did everything in French because we weren't allowed to speak English. So it really just depends on the context.
Yeah.
But even though language learning was the career that I pursued, going back to your question, it really was more about teaching students to be accepting and tolerant of other cultures and differences. And so that language proficiency, of course, is important, but that culture piece for me was just as important. And so it just made sense that when I had the opportunity to leave the classroom and go into district leadership roles, I somehow stepped into the DEI space and realized how much I love teaching adults, and that, sometimes adults need as much education as students do. And so that's why
sometimes I think all the time.
Yeah. But then also it was in that DEI space where I went, okay, there's a lot of confusion around what DEI really was intended to do, which was to bring people closer together, was to transcend those lines of difference. And so that led to the book being what it is.
I think that's beautiful. So, and that leads me to my favorite question. My favorite question is, if you had to describe productive joy, like you've mentioned a couple different things that I think bring you joy, but how would you describe productive joy?
I think about productive joy in two ways. I think that it's something for me that's both intrapersonal and interpersonal. And what I mean is, all my life I've worked to try to be empowered as an individual, to learn how to love myself. And that's a wonderful thing as an individual to feel. But I also can't deny the fact that I'm embedded in this world with others, right? We can't deny that. So I'm embedded with others socially. And so for me, I can experience joy personally, but I also choose to experience joy shared with others. I think that's important. And so, when we think about collective spaces that we share, how are we able to fill those spaces with that productive joy? And I think it always comes back to a very a very micro level, just thinking about that very simple encounter that you can have, whether it's with a family member, a friend, a colleague, a coworker, a stranger, anyone, how can we make that interaction? Are you familiar with that quote by Coach John Wooden that says, "Make each day your masterpiece"?
Yes.
So I have stolen it and extended it to be, make each interaction a masterpiece. We talk often about when you encounter someone, how can you leave and make them feel better than they did when they first met you? So for me, in that encounter, how can we make sure it's relational, not just transactional? And again, it's those three beauties that are uplifted, right? For me, productive joy is, how can I be courageous to admit when I don't know something? How can I be courageous to admit when I feel awkward about something, or something I want to say, I'm not sure how to say it? How can I find the courage to reach across those lines of difference and really, try to build bridges to someone that looks different from me? And then lastly, that spirituality, how can I, have the courage to realize that we all are connected as humans and spirits, and, extending love and light to other people doesn't diminish my own love and light, right? It's limitless. And so I think that's where that productive joy lives for me.
Oh my gosh, we just connected on like 7 different things that you would not even know about. My mother signs every letter, email, conversation with love and light. That is her phrase. And you just said that. The meeting I had right before this one, we were asked what we dream about, and my dream is to leave people better than I found them. So you just said make each interaction a masterpiece. And then that intrapersonal and interpersonal, I think that there is such power, and this is kind of how I operate is what am I doing within myself, but then what am I doing for and with others to make sure that I am leaving them better than I found them? Because it's not that they're broken. It's that if you are going to run into me, I want to be of service. I want to help. And Thymai, you do too. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So how do you help create that productive joy, that interpersonal and intrapersonal space with others? How do you help create it?
Well, one of the ways I'm trying to do that is through a business that I've started, and the business is called Innovate to Educate. So it's the term innovate, not innovate. But I stole that from science because the science definition has to do with supplying our organs, other body parts with nerves. So it's stimulating toward action. And I thought, how cool would it be to steal that term in the education senses? How can we encourage educators, those of us who are working with students, to innovate, to look within ourselves, to understand who we are at the very core so that we can be better for the students that we teach. Because as you know, as an educator yourself, you know, the way that we design lesson plans, the way that we allocate resources, the way that we call on students in the classroom, it's all based on, you know, our mental models. And so the business that I'm trying to create is around that. It's like, how can we really be willing to look within ourselves so that we can be better outward and transform outward? So it's that inner growth. And when I say this, you know, I always feel a little apprehensive, but really it's not an indictment, right, against folks working within school systems. It's an invitation to just say, okay, let's pause and just be honest and vulnerable and look within. You know, how can that be better?
Oh, well, and the really great teachers do that, right? And want that. I think about our daughter. She teaches kindergarten. She's in her 3rd year and she is exceptional. And I know I'm biased, but she is exceptional at getting those kids that everybody else has kind of said, oh, they act like this or they do that, or, you know, like have given them a label or whatever it might be and given up. And she doesn't. And so she had a little boy last year that would just, he had so many external factors outside of school that he was faced with that he couldn't regulate. And so he would just scream, just at the top of his lungs, scream. Now he's, 5, and this is the first time he's been in school and all that good stuff. But Chloe got him to the point where he could say to her, Miss McMullen, I'm feeling frustrated and I need to go to timeout, instead of standing there screaming. Well, it's been a full year since Chloe had him, and he still comes to her every single day before he gets on the bus as a little 1st grader and wants to tell her about his day. That's what you're talking about, the creation of the type of interaction with others that innovates and gets people to connect. And I think that's pretty beautiful. So well done.
Thank you. And gosh, we're lucky to have your daughter in the profession. That's amazing.
I know.
Elementary teachers are amazing. I could never do it.
Me either. I think you're wired one way or the other, and I am not wired for the littles, but she absolutely is. She is just made for it. So it's pretty beautiful. Well, Thymai, you are delightful, and I could talk to you for many hours. However, people will stop listening. And so I do have some rapid fire questions to get us close. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. First question. What is your definition of fun?
Fun. Okay. So I would think that the times that I've had, can I define it by not defining it? I would think the times I've had the most fun, honestly, are when the fun was not planned, if that makes sense. And so my husband makes fun of me for being a planner. He says I have to plan everything ahead of time. And I said, no, I'm just trying to create moments for us to have fun. But really, when I think about it, the times that have been the most fun have been completely unexpected. Mm-hmm. They sneak up on you in incredible ways, hilarious ways, and you don't realize, and you're surprised by the fact that you're smiling and laughing and your heart's soaring. You know, you didn't expect it. To me, that's the most fun. Because I think if I were to sit down and try to define it, then I'm creating this criteria or this checklist. And fun shouldn't be a checklist. I think it's just about being open in your heart to have fun. and also being willing to laugh at yourself.
Oh, that part. Okay, I love it. How do you know that you are showing up as your authentic self?
When I'm not tired, when I walk away from any, I think that when you are not your authentic self, it takes so much energy to tend to be someone you're not, to try to impress others. And so if there's an alignment within my soul because I am authentic, then I'm just not exhausted. I don't have that feeling of just, I'm drained. And, just that said too, I know that there are folks who, don't feel like they can show up, whether it's at work or somewhere else, as their authentic self. And my heart always goes out to them. And, that's kind of why that equity surfaces again, is that really everyone to feel that they can do that, because we all deserve that.
Well, you wrote a book on it, so of course it's going to minister to you, and kind of you hold that part dear. All right, how do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Oh gosh. I'm glad you're not asking my husband this question.
No. Nobody else gets to weigh in on this.
To say here. For me, happiness doesn't exist without gratitude. So this idea of always feeling grateful for every moment, even the ones that are the most challenging and maybe the ones that are most sorrowful. I think a lot of it has to do with reframing how we think about things. Oftentimes it's easy to get caught in that, I have to do this, and then I have to do this. So what would it sound like and feel like if we just switch that to, I get to do this?
Yeah.
I get to do this. I get to do this. And then it just reminds me of all the blessings I have. And then I think about people in the world that may not have, as many abundant blessings as I do. And so, how do I make sure that I'm never taking those things for granted? Flip it. And I think really just reframing helps me, influences the kind of day that I'm going to have. It allows me to extend that light and love to others, right? Even on my bad days, and just allows me to have that inner peace that I've worked so hard.
And nobody gets to take that, right? So another just connection, Thymai. This is the Post-it note that sits on my computer. I want to, I get to, I choose to. It isn't about having to, it is about getting to. And I love the way you framed that. You've framed some beautiful things. You have said so much that we all needed to be reminded of. Perhaps the most important is the lesson that your dad taught you very early on, and that's that we're all human. And as humans, we take care of each other, period. So, hard stuff. I know, not trying to make you cry, Thymai. You have been raised well, and you are changing the lives of others. And I'm just so grateful that you chose to come on Productive Joy today. You have said so many great things, but people will hold on to one. What's the one thing you really want them to hold on to today?
That's an easy one for me. I want everyone to know that they matter, no matter what. You matter, Christie. I matter. Everyone matters, no matter what.
No matter what. Well, thank you for that reminder. Sometimes we lose sight of that. And today, listeners, you've been reminded that you do matter, no matter what. And hopefully you're gaining some productive joy from that statement, that you're recognizing that you get to. You don't have to, you get to. So, Thymai, you are a gift. And I'm so grateful that you shared your gift with the Productive Joy audience. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yay. And listeners, as always, nuggets of wisdom have been dropped. It's up to you to pick them up. So grab 1 or 2 or 6 things that were said today and use those things to figure out a way to turn fun into action.